And here now, immigration attorney Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch. Kate, great to have you. Thank you so much for being here. You know, the Supreme Court's job today is to discuss whether lower courts can issue nationwide injunctions when striking down President Trump's order, as Joe outlined there. What are you expecting to hear today?
My hope and expectation is that the Supreme Court upholds the ability of lower federal courts to issue nationwide injunctions. What the result would be if the Supreme Court today says that lower courts cannot issue nationwide injunctions is chaos in the federal court system. And the federal courts are one of the only lines of defense against aggressive Trump policies and actions. That's what we've seen in the second administration. And an example of the way that this doesn't work is in the Alien Enemy Act cases regarding deportations of Venezuelans to El Salvador. In one of those cases, the Supreme Court held that a nationwide class was not proper, and that has resulted in chaotic litigation and many lower federal courts. I'm representing a few clients who are wrapped up in that, and it's been, frankly, a mess and an overwhelm of the system. So my hope is that the Supreme Court keeps all of that in mind today when they're thinking about this question, because it would really overrun the courts if we can't have nationwide injunctions on policies.
So President Trump's executive order, it's been challenged in 10 different lawsuits. What is the heart of their argument? Would you mind outlining that for us?
The argument against the executive order, well, the executive order purports to end birthright citizenship and to children who are born in the United States to undocumented parents. The argument, of course, for the order is that people who are immigrants are attempting to take advantage of our system. I will note that is absolutely not what I've seen anecdotally. I've been an immigration lawyer in this field for 20 years. I've known thousands of immigrants, and I can't think of anyone I know who came here just for the purpose of having a child and taking advantage of the system. But that is the argument that the Trump side will make. On the other side of the argument for birthright citizenship is that this is very well established, entrenched law in our nation. It's part of our Constitution. The Supreme Court has weighed in centuries ago, and it's not something at all that an executive branch could just change by executive order. It would require a constitutional amendment.
Yeah, you know, if or when the court ultimately, and you touched on this a little bit there, weighs in on the constitutionality of Trump's order, what do you believe would be the outcome the other way? And how strong do you think the president's case is here?
You know, most of the scholars and the people who have looked at this don't think that the Trump administration has a strong argument whatsoever to end birthright citizenship. The real question at hand today is about this issue of nationwide injunctions at the lower federal courts. And this case is perhaps a bad vehicle for this question for the Trump administration, because their argument on their side is so weak. And so hopefully the Supreme Court rules that nationwide injunctions can stand. And I don't think they'll actually touch on the question of whether birthright citizenship is constitutional today, but it is. The outcome of today's hearing will have a massive impact on policies and the strength and power of the Trump administration to railroad things through during the next, 3.5 years.
Yeah, you know, we have about 30 seconds left. I asked an attorney this last hour, but I'm curious. There is the language in this citizenship clause that narrows birthright citizenship to children born in the U.S. who are, quote, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. How do you think the president may try to use that language specifically to make his case here?
Well, I think the argument would be obvious that if they're, not U.S. citizens, they're not subject to our jurisdiction. But of course, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. That's intended to apply to maybe diplomats who are from foreign nations. But of course, immigrants of all levels, undocumented immigrants or people who are legal immigrants, are subject to the jurisdiction. They have to abide by our laws. They can be prosecuted, et cetera. So the argument is that someone who is an immigrant is not subject to our jurisdiction, but that just doesn't hold water.
All right, Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch, we hope you stick around. We'll check back in as this case gets underway. Thank you so much for weighing in.